Welcome to the Brent Holland Show. Tonight, folks, very serious subject matter with a very serious man. The book is called Ramadi, Declassified. Our guest tonight is Lieutenant Colonel Tony Deane. He is retired a colonel, but when he was over in Ramadi in 2006, he was a lieutenant colonel indeed. Before we get started, I'd just like to dedicate this show to a fallen comrade, Andrew Miller, who died of an IED over in Afghanistan 2010. And we remembered you, Andrew, and we will never forget. And also to my good friend, Captain Ray Weiss, who was over in Afghanistan as well. 2 tours of duty as a frontline surgeon, made it home. Thank you, Ray, for your service. Colonel Tony Deane, sir, thank you for your service and to your family as well.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
It is my great honor and pleasure, sir. Thank you, sir, for coming on. Now, I want to talk a little bit before we get started about some of the people that you worked with. Some of them are pretty impressive folks, like your driver, Mr. Rompel. I was wondering if you could tell us some of the stories behind him and where he came from and how he problem solves.
Yeah, you know, I was really lucky that I had good kids on my crew. And, you know, we were all tankers, so it's all about the guys on your crew. And, you know, Mike Rumpel was a tanker. He loved being a tanker. You know, it was time for me to get a new driver. The reason he got the job is because he said that he didn't want it. So I said, yeah, you don't really want people hanging out with the colonel that wants to be there. So that kid never complained, never, you know, always ready for the mission. And we went out every day, and him and, you know, the gunner, Brown, they were just amazing guys. And they were just a microcosm of, you know, just the great kids that I served with.
How do you come to rely on their judgment, sir?
Well, it comes with trust, and it comes with practice. So my unit spent a lot of time getting ready to go to Iraq, both in Germany, and then we were actually held in Kuwait for about 6 months, because at the time the war was considered being won. And we did a lot of training together. And plus, you know, with the soldier, you know, you kind of trust people from the word go. You know what I mean? They're wearing the uniform, and you got to have that, have faith in them until they prove you wrong, instead of making people prove themselves.
There's a great story as well I'd like you to tell about Chief Forgash's, his wounds, and also what you told first class folks afterwards. That was funny.
Okay, so we had a really unique situation where I had an Iraqi Army battalion that worked for me, and how that actually worked, you know, no one asked too many questions. We just got the job done. So they said, hey, these guys work for you, different army, whatever. So I said, okay. So in that, I actually had a team of Marines led by Lieutenant Colonel Chris Stillings, who another great American, and Chief Forgash was part of his team, and he didn't have enough people to go around. So I gave some of the guys from my battalion, some of the senior NCOs, some medics, I gave them to Chris's team, and they were out there training the Iraqi Army, and out there leading a patrol. And, you know, Chief Forgash, who I had built a pretty good friendship with in the few weeks we were there, was out on patrol with the Iraqis, and the patrol got ambushed, and the chief got shot in the stomach. It was horrible. And Sergeant Folks, who was a great NCO going into it, but, you know, kind of a quiet guy, not the guy that you really expect to be Audie Murphy, all of a sudden he hears this call that Folks gets shot. Or that Chief Forgash gets shot. Folks, like, is safety of the compound, of the Iraqi compound, jumps up, jumps in a Humvee, grabs some poor MP that just happened to be standing there, tells him to get on the machine gun, and drives into a firefight with the sole purpose of finding his buddy. And, you know, his buddy, they'd only been together for a couple of weeks at this time, but he you know, was on his team. He was going to save his teammate. He found Chief Forgash, who was actually bleeding with a pretty serious wound in his stomach, staunches the bleeding, throws him in the Humvee, and races to Charlie Med, get back on Camp Ramadi. And, you know, the surgeons, who we had a great surgical team there, they said, hey, if he wouldn't have got here this quick, he wouldn't have made it. So folks, you know, broke about 50 rules in doing this, right? You know, I mean, true heroism, but, you know, there were some rules to also be had in combat. And so I called folks and I said, hey, fill out the award form. And folks is like, I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing my job. I said, yeah, I got it, Chief. Or I got it, Sarge. You just doing your job. But I said, you either fill this out or else I'm going to, take some judicial punishment against you because you broke all these rules. And, and to me, to this day, I remember, I guess, folks took a long time to decide whether to get the medal or to get the punishment. Well, luckily he went with the medal, but just a great guy who, like a lot of the leaders we had, just rose to the occasion based on necessity.
And Chief Forgash's whereabouts and his prognosis?
He actually was a Marine reservist, and he had a battle on his hand for a few years, but he is now a sheriff's deputy in California someplace. He went back on the job.
Thank God.
And I talked to him and write the book, and just a great guy, quiet, and I think he's working on getting his PhD right now. Just a great man.
Sir, there are many that didn't come home. How do you deal with that on a personal level and to keep the morale up in the company, in the battalion?
Well, at the time, we took a lot of casualties, and sadly, it was 16 within the task force, counting everybody, and then another guy that was part of my battalion that was in another task force. At the time, I couldn't dwell on it because although I lost a guy, I still had 500, 600 guys to look out for. You realize that those guys were all volunteers. They were trying to accomplish a mission. They believed in the mission. Their life was not sacrificed in vain. They were out there, defending their country, and they're American heroes, just like the guys who had it much worse, the guys who went ahead on Omaha Beach or in the Chosin Reservoir.
What would you say to the students that are listening right now about the sacrifice those people made?
Well, the term selfless service is kind of fallen out of favor, I think, in modern culture right now. But these guys, they joined the military to be part of something bigger, and they saw the threat. Most of these kids joined after 9/11, and so they saw the threat to America. The one thing that really struck me to the guy was we weren't over there to kill people or to teach them a lesson or anything. We were out there to solve the problem. And the solving the problem and what these guys showed and did and the responsibilities that was kind of thrust upon some of these guys at some really junior levels. Lieutenants who are 22, 23 years old, captains that are 25, 26, sergeants that are, some of them as young in the 20.
Yeah.
That these guys went out there and they're out there every day interfacing with the population, making life and death decisions. And, people want to badmouth this generation, but there are some great young men and women in this generation.
Gives you hope. Can you tell some of those stories of those young 20-year-olds, the lieutenants, the sergeants, the NCOs as well?
Yes,
One
I
that comes to mind?
There was a couple of them. There was 3 lieutenants in my Bravo company. Lieutenant Ian Blackstone,
Yes,
Lieutenant Perfecto Sanchez, and Lieutenant Mike Leteri. And there was a 4th lieutenant, Lieutenant Scott Love, and he was killed the 3rd day that we were there in an IED strike. And so we had to jumble around the platoons. Ian ended up taking over another platoon just because we were missing key leaders. And then later on, something else happened, and Ian ended up taking over the 3rd platoon. And here's a kid that just whatever we threw on him, he would just say yes sir, and he'd go out and do it. Perfecto and Mike, they didn't have the benefit of the train-up. Those kids graduated college, went to infantry school, went to Ranger school and airborne school, and they came straight into combat. Both of them first time out hit an IED, came under attack the first day out by themselves. They went on every day, didn't falter, didn't waver, trusted their NCOs around them. The guys in my Bravo Company 26, Team Dealer, those guys, what they went through, they probably had about as worse as anyone in the war did. The company ended up taking 25% casualties. Are
there lessons learned that you observe, sir, from these young folks that the students listening right now can integrate into their own lives?
Well, I think what they learned is, trust your teammates and make sure what you're doing is solving the problem. And that was one of the things that struck us at the battalion level. and at the down at the company level. It's like, are we solving the right problem? And by focusing on, hey, we need to find a solution to this instead of just like hunting down terrorists. Hey, let's we were given the mission to help the Iraqi government build a safe and secure Iraq, and that's what we did. And too many people kind of got spun off. Hey, we're going to do this, or we're going to build schools, or we're going to hunt terrorists, or we're going to do all these different things. Like, well, what's really going to help build a secure Iraq? And one, it was building police, help getting police, and two was trying to get some political accommodation, which that came later. I mean, that wasn't our initial charter, but that all kind of worked out while we were there. But make sure that you're, one of the questions I'd always ask my guys is, how's this helping? Whatever we're doing, it's like, is this helping or is this not helping? And if it was helping, we'd keep doing it, and if it wasn't, we'd figure out something else to do.
Okay. What were some of the things that were working? What were some of the things that weren't working?
Well, one of the things that wasn't working was the Americans were really providing all the security. The Iraqi police had 200 policemen in it, in a city of 300,000, which was considered the most dangerous city in the world.
Yeah.
In the world. And so, and the Iraqi Army was disbanded after 2003. And so it was just, by 2006, it was just starting to get its feet underneath itself, and it wasn't very effective. So security fell upon the Americans. We couldn't really figure out who was who. I told one of the sheikhs one time, why can't the Americans do this? Why are you guys letting this happen? I told him very frankly, out of frustration mainly, was I'm from Nebraska. So if you go back to my hometown, Nebraska, I can tell you who's a good guy and who's a bad guy, who belongs, who doesn't, and we will never understand a different culture. There's cultural differences that if you're not there, you'll never understand. We figured out that what we need to do is recruit police. We did have some people that were friendly to the coalition. Satar was this charismatic guy that carried a Chrome 45 Texas Sesquicentennial 6-shooter. I don't know where he got it from, but he carried this thing over his robes, and very boisterous, very dynamic. We turned to these guys and said, hey, we need your help recruiting policemen. And so they started helping us get guys to join the police, which wasn't arming the tribes, which wasn't, creating a militia. It was, hey, this is the legitimate security forces. And over time, actually the first one was on the 4th of July, 2006. And it was at their house. They even volunteered to have it at their house. And their house took mortar fire. And I wasn't there. So I drove over there after the mortar attack. And I said, hey guys, I'm sorry. Their families are there, their kids are there, and they're like, well, the mortars didn't really hit their compound. It hit some of our vehicles around the edge. And they said, well, Allah made the mortars miss. Why would we stop? And I was like, wow, these guys are very, very serious about what needs to happen. And they gained a lot of trust in my mind that day. And so by September, actually on the 9th of September, 2006, Satar handed me the paperwork and says, here's our proclamation for the Anbar Awakening, and we respect the rule of law, we're going to back the government in Baghdad, and we're going to throw the coalition forces, and together we'll rid Ramadi of al-Qaeda.
So this is a huge breakthrough, without question.
Yeah.
Because you're partnering with the local people, and as you said, you come from Nebraska, you're able to tell the good guy from the bad guy. Very difficult when you've got insurgents intertwined with the populace over there. Who's the bad guy, who's the good guy? By partnering, it's a very smart move with the local folks and the local leaders. They're able to know and tell you who the good guys are and the bad guys are.
Well, and the other thing too is, with the lack of police force, the people had no one to call. And actually, a brilliant move on al-Qaeda's part is they blew up the cell phone towers too. So there was no way to call. So the terrorists, as in today, they're very good at intimidating, and when necessary, murdering the population to get them under control. But their biggest tool was intimidation. And so, I'd always, a little empathy went a long way in their situation. They're like, well, why don't they get rid of these guys? It's like, well, if and if there was no police and an armed guy show up at my door today, he would have a problem. Probably 3 or 4 guys, they'd probably have problems. But if 6 guys show up, well, then I got to listen to them because there's not much I can do, you know? Wife can only reload so fast. So it wasn't that many people that were just terrorizing the city. And, you know, the beauty of Satar and the rest of the sheikhs was, you know, whatever, Shane or High Plains Drifter, you know, he got the school marms and the shopkeepers together, and they said, hey, together we're going to fight the bullets. And that's what they did.
And that's what they did, and that brought some stability big time, very quickly, almost overnight, you're right. Right away into the city, and that's exactly right. There was a force there that people could rely on to provide security in order to carry on a normal life. So,
and it wasn't us.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the problems, you know, the answers to the problems lay in Ramadi. It laid in the Sunni community, and we just helped bring a moderate voice to the forefront, and he was able to pull things together.
Okay, let's go back into combat a little bit. When your guys were going down a street, what kind of forces were they up against? They were snipers, obviously. There was IEDs. What kind of things did they have to be cognizant of all the time and on edge?
The biggest threat to us was IEDs. And there was some snipers, and there was a few pretty good-sized ambushes. One of the frustrating things was the enemy wouldn't stay and fight. You know, the mental stress, because you never knew. They weren't wearing a uniform. It wasn't the Cold War. It wasn't even Desert Storm. You know, you knew who was who. So here, terrorists were very good. I mean, they would hide behind women and children. One of the hotbeds of terrorism we figured out was the university there in Ramadi, Al-Anbar University. And I'm sure that the terrorists would have loved for us to roll in there and shoot the place up. What a propaganda win. Yeah. So one of the things is we talked to these guys, and we talked about the young leaders, was, hey, you got to realize, you know, that your actions can well be on the national news, you know, or the international news, you know. Mm-hmm. And so your actions, you know, represent America, and they're probably going to get filmed. And so the guys were very, not out of fear, but they were very careful when we use violence. You know, we tried to, you know, use violence only when necessary. And then when it was necessary, we used it overwhelmingly. But, you know, just going down the street, you know, one of the strains on these guys every day was, well, is that some 20-year-old guy hanging out on the street corner, or is that a trigger man? And that's one of the things that our guys got pretty good at judging who was who.
It's completely different from open field warfare, isn't it? I mean, you're right in an urban center, and you don't know who's your buddy and who's going to call somebody to launch that RPG at your head as well. Now, folks, I don't want you to think that Colonel Tony Deane escaped it either. He was there in firefights, and there's a wonderful line that he said, you know, things are going very bad. I'm going to paraphrase it, sir. You know, things are going very bad when the commander is engaged in battle, and you indeed were engaged in battle several times. Can you tell one of those stories, sir? Especially the story where you ended up on the wrong side of the street alone. You shouldn't laugh.
Well, I, you know, I'll be honest with you. You know, through bad luck and probably, you know, incompetence on my part. Luckily, I had Sergeant Roberts, who was the head of my security detail, that kept me from getting too far out ahead of myself. And I was an enlisted private, and sometimes you know, think you're 18 again. So you know, I tell you, I think a little bit better story is when we first got there, I was a veteran Desert Storm. Right, so I had a combat patch. I've been to combat, and I had not been to Iraq since the invasion in 2003. So I was like, hey, I've got this down. I'm a combat vet. I know what I'm doing. And the first time that we went out, the outgoing company commander from the unit we were replacing, and the incoming commander, Captain Lou Lansone, and his crew. So only 3 Humvees went out. And at that day, there was Al Qaeda drove a 500-pound bomb in a dump truck into an Iraqi compound, and it blew up. The inside of it caught on fire, so we had to evacuate. And so the first 3 people to show up was me, Captain Lansone, and the outgoing company commander. And so we found ourselves in this tremendous firefight. And that's kind of where the quote came from. Was I kept thinking to myself, this isn't at all like Desert Storm. This is nothing like a Desert Storm. And so, after that day, I said, okay, everything that I thought was going to happen, I was probably wrong on, and we need to kind of start rethinking everything we're doing. Actually, it's Gunner Corporal Jackson who read the book and then told me, it's like, yeah, I was the one shoot first. But these guys, we just started firing, and then more guys came, and people trusted their leaders, and we had trust in guys, and actually Chief Forgash was a hero that day, helping run up the Iraqis. Really just like, okay, I spent 6 months getting ready for this thing, and now on day one, it's like, okay, I got to rethink everything.
How did you left Ramadi pretty much intact and everything was going fine. Then all of a sudden, Daesh comes along and they take it over in 2015. Latest word has it that the Iraqi government says they've taken it back. How did you feel, 2 things, when your good friend Sheikh Satar was murdered, and how did you feel when Daesh took over Ramadi?
Well, when Satar was killed, I'd come back and I moved on. I changed, and I was in a new job. I was helping train people getting ready to go to Iraq, and I was talking on the phone, and the guy I was talking on the phone said, "Hey, go look at the TV. Is this the Sheikh you told me about?" And I saw that Satar was killed by Al Qaeda, and I remember thinking, I had the same feeling in my stomach, and I used to get this headache every time we lost a soldier, and it's like, I really considered him, one of us, and more importantly, I like the guy. I mean, me and him, we had business dealings, and there was a certain level of trust and mistrust between us, but personally, we kind of got along. He'd tell me, hey, when this is all gone, when this is all done, everything's fine. We'll go down to Abu Dhabi. We'll paint the town. Okay, so, but I mean, we had a pretty good relationship. When Ramadi fell in 2015 I'll tell you, it was kind of disheartening, and it was also downplayed in the media too. Yeah. But mainly because of what what my soldiers went through to take it back, and the soldiers of the Ready First Combat Team, the brigade. I mean, this just wasn't my guys. It was the entire brigade, and then the Marines and the SEALs that were there. I mean, it was a team effort for the people at Ramadi. But for what those guys went through, and then more importantly, of what could have been. And that's what really kind of upset me. And we saw it coming after the fallout in 2011, that, the really could, right before we pulled out, there was a real chance at a lasting peace there. And then it all just kind of got frittered away.
Prospects for the future, the only news we get, of course, is mainstream media, and they always show the Iraqi Army primarily in reverse. And is that justified?
Well, I think a soldier's only as good as his leaders and his trust in the government, right? So I think that there's a lot of Iranian influence in
big time
in Iraq right now, and until the Sunnis see the government is representative, and the Kurds. Everyone says, oh, we need to divide the country up into 3. Well, if you get a small enough map, that makes sense. But when you start asking the hard questions, well, who gets Baghdad? Who gets Mosul? And then even at the the micro level, oh, so my farm has got to be given to somebody else. Well, that'll never happen. So to me, unifying the government is the answer. And Prime Minister Maliki, who for a while there was saying all the right things. He turned out to be pretty secular, and started purging the Sunnis from his government.
Yeah.
And then after that, the new guy, Haider, he or Abadi, he was saying the right things, but saying the right things and doing the right things are two different things. So to me, until there's a real much better political coming together, and kind of the people get tired of the violence, because to me the Sunnis in Iraq are caught between two things. They got the devil they know, the terrorists, who at least kind of look like them and the same religion as them, and they got the devil they don't know, which is this Shia government that's depending on who you listen to from the Shias or Iran is out to kill them all.
Yeah, I'm always worried when Iran's involved in anything because they have their own agenda. But we're selling them planes now, so who knows? All that to say is, sir, I'd like to say a few words about the sacrifice that your family made while you were overseas.
Well, my wife was what was called the family support group, which was we left soldiers back, non-commissioned officers and a captain back to kind of look after the families. So she was the advisor to that. But something, the families of soldiers, I mean, they do their best. They put on the brave face, and while we were gone, they made the best of it, and they became scorers for the basketball games. They're coaching little league, and me and my wife joked, she had to be the scorer for a intramural basketball game, and she, who knows what the score was or the time was kept, but they did what was necessary. And my two girls, I've moved them. One was a freshman, one was in 7th grade. No, I'm sorry, one was a 10th grader, the other one was in 8th grade when we moved to Germany. Didn't know a kid in the high school, and they just integrated. And it's not just during deployment; it's the train up. It's both my girls went to 3 high schools in 3 years, and that's not my family. That's a lot of families. And what the families do to support the soldiers who are supporting our country, people give them a lot of lip service, but they deserve that.
Yeah.
That's more.
And more, without question. So a final question, I always ask this to everybody who comes on the Brent Holland Show, and that is, you're literally talking to every Canadian university student across the country right now, from coast to coast to coast, 3 coasts in Canada, and international students. A lot of American students end up in Canadian universities for whatever reason, and across the world as well. What would you say to them?
I would say that your generation is finding itself in a very difficult time, but there's a lot of good in the world, despite what the villainization that you read on your Facebook page, and you got to look for the good. And I'll go back to one of my personal heroes, JFK. Was that's not what your country can do for you, but you can do for your country. And I think be that Canada, or just for the forces of good. And the other quote I kind of throw out there is, that there are evil people in the world.
Yes, sir.
And if you don't speak against the evil people, they win.
Absolutely, and we don't want that to happen.
I think Emerson's spinning in his grave on that one.
No, I don't think so. And the JFK quote was perfect.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Colonel Tony Deane in 2006. Colonel Tony Deane today. Ramadi, Declassified is the name of his book. He's just been a great guest. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
I'm Brent Holland from The Brent Holland Show. See you all next time.